Okay, good morning. I'm Ronali Chioco from the Connect and Communicate Series Planning Committee. Thank you for joining us today. Also, thanks to Erin Burns, the leader of our team, for providing closed captioning for this session. Our presentation will be recorded and made available on the College and Research Division blog and sent to those who registered. This session is brought to you by the College and Research Division Board of the Pennsylvania Library Association. I'd like to thank the CRD Board for supporting the Connect and Communicate initiative. If you're not part of the Pennsylvania Library Association but live in Pennsylvania, please consider joining PALA for more great programs and initiatives. Our panelists today, Carmen and Joslenne Pena, will be speaking about Code for Her, Reimagining Computing Education for Academic Library Outreach. Carmen is the Sally W. Kalin Librarian for Learning Innovations in Information Sciences and Business Liaison Librarian for the Penn State University Libraries. She holds an MSLS from Clarion University of Pennsylvania and an MFA from Bowling Green State University. Carmen has presented at PALA, ALA Midwinter, and annual conferences. She is the founder of Code for Her. Joslenne Pena earned her MS in Information Sciences and Technology in 2015 and is a PhD candidate in informatics at Penn State. She recently completed a one-year internship as a research associate in human-centered systems at Honeywell Aerospace. Joslenne has presented at the I-Conference in 2018 and 2016, ACM Technical Symposium on Computer Science Education, ACM Richard Tapia Celebration of Diversity in Computing, Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing, and EduLearn. She's the coding workshop consultant for Code for Her and has previously taught coding for IdTech and the iTech Academy. During the presentation, feel free to add questions to the chat box. I'll make a list for our panelists. After their presentation, we'll open up the floor for attendees to ask questions. So, are you ready?
Yes.
All right, I'll turn it over to you, Carmen and Joslenne.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you to everyone viewing online today. And like she said, we will answer questions at the end, so we ask that you hold those. We're both here to talk about Code for Her. And Code for Her is a 9-week beginner coding workshop series targeted to female and gender diverse students, faculty, and staff at Penn State University Park campus. We'll be talking about the inspiration for and creation of Code for Her, our pedagogical approaches, and current research initiative for the workshop series. And again, jot down any questions you may have, put those in the chat. We'll be happy to answer those at the end. So first we'll discuss the background for Code for Her, the creation and the inspiration. So everything came about whenever I attended ALA Annual in 2017. And I heard Reshma Sujani speak. She was the keynote speaker at ALA Annual that year. Reshma Sujani is the founder and CEO of Girls Who Code. And Girls Who Code is a nationwide network of workshops and boot camps and summer camps for young women and girls to learn programming. They do some robotics, things like that. And their mission is to create gender parity in tech by, it's like 2020 or 2025. I'm blanking on which year it is right now, but so far they've reached over 90,000 young women and girls. And Reshma Sujani was inspired to create Girls Who Code whenever she ran for Congress in 2010. And this was in New York. And although she lost, whenever she was campaigning, she would go into computer science classrooms and she would wonder, where are the girls? Because they were largely male dominated. So this was her inspiration for creating Girls Who Code. And whenever I was looking through my ALA program, I saw, you know, closing the gender gap for women in computing and Girls Who Code. And I was, thinking to myself, okay, this fits really closely with my role. Although I do educate adults, I am the liaison to the College of Information Sciences and Technology. And I've had similar experiences when I go into those classrooms and do my library instruction. I often wonder, why are there so few women? And sometimes I've gone into classrooms where there's less than 5 women. I've been in classrooms of over 60 students, and at one time there was 3 women. I've gone into classes of over 100 people, and sometimes when the students are working on an activity or something, I'll just count out of curiosity. And one time I went into a large classroom of over 150 students, and there was 10 women. So I've also had these questions myself. And so she spoke, and one of the things that most resonated with me was something that she's actually very famous for saying, and that is, you cannot be what you cannot see. This is something that she says frequently in her TED Talk. Her TED Talk is Teach Girls Bravery, Not Perfection. And I also thought a lot about my own experiences growing up and being in college, and how I never received really any encouragement to pursue computer science or even try computer programming. In fact, I never even knew a woman programmer, and this is personally, I'd seen them on TV and stuff, until 5 years ago. And that person is the wife of a friend of mine, and she's a programmer for our graduate college. Another thing I've noticed too is whenever I do collection development for the College of IST, oftentimes I cannot find any materials that's written about women, written by women, written by somebody that's a person of color or from any other minority population. So that's also been a really big struggle for me myself, is to have representative voices in tech. So I thought to myself, after seeing her speak, what else could I do to provide a space or a voice for women and gender diverse individuals in tech in particular, inspired by Girls Who Code? What could I do to promote tech even further to these populations? So as I waited in line to get my free copy of Girls Who Code, I thought about this even more. I thought about, could I do something at Penn State that's similar, or what's going on at Penn State that could be similar? And when I got up to her and got to meet Reshma Saujani, I asked her, is there anything like Girls Who Code that exists in an academic environment? And she said, I don't know, but you should start one. And I thought, okay, I will. So whenever I got on the shuttle to get back to my hotel, I started furiously brainstorming. And here is a picture of my notebook that I keep whenever I go to conferences, because I take notes on paper and not a computer, because I remember things better when I take notes on paper. But so you can see at the top, and it may be a little bit difficult to see, but I wrote, could an IST or computer student help with Women Who Code, name pending, as engaged scholarship or an internship? Could they help create or assess? And then you can see that I brainstormed titles. So I wrote She Grammars. I wrote Code for Her. I wrote She Codes, but that name was taken by a foundation or a group in Israel. And I wrote Coding for Her. And then these were notes from another session I attended. But this is where I started thinking about stuff. And so I thought, yeah, what's going on at Penn State? I didn't want to step on any toes if there was something going on like that. Or if there was something going on at other libraries or just other places throughout the country, you know, I wanted to investigate. I wanted to know. Okay, so I did. Nothing is going on. What's going on here at Penn State in the traditional curriculum is that there are a couple computer sciences that classes that anybody can take, but they're very large classes for the most part. Typically, and this is anecdotal from what I have heard, when I have asked, they are largely male dominated. The other classes that students may take are STEM specific. You need to be going into a STEM major in order to take these classes. So if someone wanted to, just out of curiosity, take a class and they were very beginning, coming from that novice place, perhaps this wouldn't maybe be an ideal learning environment. Also, too, are there clubs or professional organizations doing this kind of education? Not really. The professional organizations are not teaching skills. It's more for networking and things like that, with the assumption that you already have the skills. And we have two groups on campus. We have Nittany Data Labs. There is somewhat of an assumption that you possess skills, and they are crash coursing you in Python, I believe. And then you go on to do more things with data science. And the onus is on you to do a lot of self-education. We also then have an AI group where they crash course you really quickly in Python. And whenever I met the organizer of the group, I asked, okay, what do you assume the gender makeup is of your group? And he's like, oh yeah, it's all dudes. And I was like, okay. So I was just like, this space needs to be created. And I wanted to do it. And I set out to achieve 3 very specific goals. I wanted to create an inclusive, safe learning environment. I wanted to make sure it was free. Obviously non-credit bearing. I can't just, you know, create a class out of nowhere. And obviously then there would be some other issues with creating a class for a specific targeted group. I wanted to make this for any female or gender diverse individual student to learn coding. And I wanted to make this an environment that promotes confidence. I have heard and read too many, you know, stories, experiences about women feeling intimidated, silenced, afraid, or excluded in a male-dominated tech classroom or learning environment. And for some, a male-dominated learning environment, even if the aforementioned hasn't been their experience, it may not be the ideal learning environment for them. And if any of these are the case, there should be an alternative, or at least work being done to create parity and traditional curricular structure. Obviously, that's a whole nother hugely complicated issue, but this work is not being offered or done, certainly not at Penn State, to my knowledge. So I just wanted to make that caveat. So Code for Her was born. In the spring of 2018, we ran a pilot. It was very informal. It was done for 5 weeks, and I recruited an IST volunteer, not Joss, to see if there was interest and retention. It was application-based because of space constraints. It was in a classroom that held 23 people. And this is not the marketing for that. This is actually the marketing from fall 2018. But the marketing for the spring was basically the same. We received over 70 applications for those 23 spots, and we did not market that aggressively. Of the 23 people that we gave spots to, 21 of those remained for the 5 weeks. We did HTML, CSS, and 1 week of JavaScript. The workshops are completely free. All the participants need to do is bring their own laptop. So for the fall of 2018, We ran 2 sections of Code for Her. I had faculty and staff ask me in the spring whenever we did the pilot if they could also apply for Code for Her. And I was like, well, no, it's just for students right now. But that did kind of plant the seed of, well, maybe I should do this offering as well. Definitely wanted to create an opportunity for this other population. So in the fall, we ran a student section and a faculty and staff section. So on Tuesday evenings, we ran a 2-hour faculty and staff section, and on Thursday evenings was the student section for 2 hours. So 4 hours total each week of Code for Her, plus the buffer of an hour around that. We received a total of 221 applications for the fall round from students and faculty and staff. We had 25 spots for each section because we moved to a different space. We marketed pretty aggressively. We had digital signage all over campus. We did social media. We had some flyers. We got picked up by Penn State's Twitter. And we also had Onward State, which is Penn State's blog, do a little story about us whenever they saw our library's social media. So that worked a lot in our favor, I think. And because of the expansion of Code for Her, I definitely knew I would need a lot of help. So surprise, I don't know how to program. And I wanted to do this, but I couldn't teach it myself. I needed to sit in the class and learn. So I was fortunate enough to secure funding for a graduate assistant and an intern. So Joslenne is our coding workshop consultant, and Kathleen O'Leary, Katie, is our Code for Her workshop intern. And she is an undergrad in the College of IST. And they have really taken the lead on developing the curriculum. They work very closely together to do that. At the beginning, it was noted that Joss has done a lot of work with ID Tech, so has Katie. So they both have really rich teaching experience, and Katie has even taught some of the sections of Code for Her. And that's really great professional development for her. I want to make sure that she gets a lot of opportunities to develop professionally in this context. She's presented about Code for Her already, which is great. And in that vein, she proposed the idea to do Code for Her ++. And we've done little one-shot events, one so far. She also works for Major League Hacking. It's an organization that does logistics for hackathons. And she travels 2 weekends, usually a month, all over North America, and to do that. And they also do what's called Major League Local Host. And it's workshop in a box type things. So we did a build and deploy your own website workshop where participants did a very basic website with HTML and CSS. And future events for the spring are going to include like a LaTeX workshop run by Joss. So that's what we have going on right now. That's the introduction inspiration for Code for Her. And next, we're going to talk about the pedagogy.
Okay, so hi everyone. So I'm going to be talking about the pedagogy and then also in another section, the research. So here we have the languages that we taught. So we have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Usually they're known as sort of like the cornerstone languages for web development, although there are other languages where you can develop for the web, but these are obviously like the main three that are just the cornerstone. So why web development? So besides the fact that it was the topic for the pilot, and I personally wasn't involved with the pilot, but I thought it might be good just to continue on with that. And then the reasons beyond that are, first, low barrier to entry for novice. So this idea that the learning curve is a little bit lower than I would say a traditional programming language like C++ or Python or something like that. And I wanted it to be something that they could, you know, grab onto right away. And it's sort of like an ease of transition into programming. So if they're learning these languages, more than likely they'll be able to pick up on the other languages later on. So I think they're the best languages for just like an intro, an intro or beginning to just the world of programming. So second is high payout with minimal effort. So again, it kind of ties into the first bullet point, but again, it's this idea that, okay, it's web development. And so with these languages, the participants can actually see, you know, their effort being displayed on a screen. So that's not something you can say for every language that you work with, every programming language, but at least with HTML and CSS, which is you're developing your own web page, right? And then you're designing it and you're giving it behavior and structure. And so that's something that you can see right away. And it kind of gives participants, you know, it just gives them like confidence, and just they get, you know, really happy to see something on the screen. They're like, wow, I did that, you know? And so I think these languages and web development specifically do that really well, especially given the amount of time, you know, the workshop is. So third is interactivity of languages. So again, they all work well together. And so it makes sense to sort of dive in to all three, because then they get to see how well they work together. And then each one is responsible for a different portion or a different action in terms of web development. And so it just makes sense to sort of dive into all three, and then they kind of like come together. And then the last one is creativity. So again, going back to some of the other bullet points and what I spoke about, but it makes participants be more creative. So when you're thinking about web development, again, it's this idea of design. You're structuring your own web page. Like if someone is, you know, they get to think about, wow, what idea do I want to work on or display? Or, you know, we had a lot of participants that came up with creative ideas, you know, like beyond just being like a personal web page where I want to show my resume or my CV, you know, like a blog or like a travel blog where they get to show pictures of like places they've been internationally, you know, things related to like recipes and like music and all that stuff. So it was really cool to see that beyond like the career development as like a topic or something they wanted to implement, there were other creative ideas floating around as well.
I remember there was a student who had a website of her cat's naps.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting one.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah.
Okay. So the teaching approach, here we have 4 bullet points, but these are things that we wanted to try and incorporate. So again, this is building upon the pilot. So the pilot was informal. Mm-hmm. And so I think the goal was to try and make it a little bit like just a tiny bit more structured without losing that informal, which is a balance. Like that's very hard to do. So like, you don't obviously want to move towards making it completely like a course where, okay, here's homework, here's grading, you know, all this stuff. But it's just that balance we were trying to reach of like, okay, we want this to be like motivational. We want them to learn something, but we also want it to still be like fun and like withheld to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. So we have here informal learning. Again, it's that balance. So I have here affords a comfortable, safe, inclusive environment for grasping concepts and asking questions. So that was really important. The second is code dissection. So this is something that I like worked on, and I did quite a few of the weeks, and then I'll go into it in the next slide. But essentially it's following along and doing hands-on coding with me. And they constructed, you know, like snippets of code in real time with me. And so they were able to do something from scratch and follow along. And like I said, I'll talk about that in the next slide. The third bullet point we have here is personalized attention. So this probably wouldn't be something we could do if the amount of people in the workshop at any one given time was like upwards of 50,
Right.
as opposed to like the max we had here was 25.
Yeah.
And also with the help of Katie, who isn't here. So she acts, you know, if I'm seen as the instructor, she acts as my TA.
Mhm.
And so it was easy for us after we were done for the day teaching or going over something that we were able to go talk to everyone one-on-one just to check in and make sure they're doing okay and see if they have any personal questions, you know, ones they either may have not wanted to ask in class, or they were just more comfortable asking one-on-one, talking to them about their projects, you know, sort of building like that relationship.
Yep.
And then last but not least is project emphasis. So again, this is, you know, it's free and non-credit bearing, so it's not an official class, but we did want to encourage the participants to work towards a project, because it's something that I think for the effort that they put in for the 9 weeks, I think they'd feel really good about themselves. Because again, this is also confidence building, right? And so, you know, you may go through the workshop and say, oh, I learned something. But, you know, wouldn't it be nice to also say, wow, I learned something and here's something tangible that I can show for the effort that I put in. And I think that's a really, like, neat thing. Like, I think it's personally a good idea. And for me, I would always, you know, love to show my effort, you know, sort of like implemented somewhere. And so I think that project emphasis was really important, and it gave them something to look like, to work towards, look forward to, but also just kind of like implement what they've learned throughout the, you know, the weeks, like in this one mini project. So, yeah. So for code dissection, so before I get into what you're seeing right now, Penn State has a code repository. So if you heard of something called GitHub, which was recently bought out by Microsoft, there's something similar called GitLab. And so Penn State has, I think, a license with GitLab. And again, it's a repository. And so what I use this for, again, you know, kind of what it sounds is like I kept all the code that we used in this like repository essentially. And so it's free and it's public. And so if the participants wanted to, throughout the course of the workshop, look, you know, revisit the code that we did in class or anything else, it would be there for them to view. They can download it on their own machines. And even now, after the workshop is over, they'll always have access to this, no matter what. And so it's also about making these resources available to them so they can continue their learning or revisit whenever they want to. So the next part is what we did in code dissection. So what it is we're dissecting each line of code. So let's say as a participant and I'm leading, we have something in mind that we're going towards. So I would choose basically different snippets of code that do a particular feature or action. In this case, we have animation text. So the goal of this particular piece of code is that it did some really cool animation text like on your page. And so I would literally start line by line for, you know, this piece of code, and I would just line by line type it out. And then it sort of gave participants the ability to say, okay, I know what it takes to build something from scratch. And that was super valuable. But also it allowed people to take a breather. Like we weren't just, you know, copying and going and then not explaining anything. We were making sure they were following along and able to ask questions like, hey, what does this mean? So if I chose a particular line right now, if you're looking at this with me, and maybe line 34, or excuse me, line 35, any of those lines, right? And a participant would say, hey, what does var string mean? Or what does that do? And so we got a lot of positive feedback from people saying, or excuse me, participants saying, this was helpful because you were able to break it down for me and unpack everything. Like, what does this mean? What does this do? And then once we got to the final product, how do they work together? So it's like sort of specific and then more general, and then seeing how those all work together and what does that do. And so it was a really valuable thing for participants to do and see, but also it was something that we sort of built upon as well. So we didn't just do this 1 week. I think we did it for at least maybe half of the workshop. And so we built different sort of pieces of code or like web page templates. And again, it's just this idea of seeing what it takes to build something from start to finish and then being able to ask those questions. Because when you're doing coding hands-on, a lot of times as programmers, like even the best programmers, they don't know everything by heart in terms of like all the syntax, all the rules. They may need help still, right? Like problem solving, and that's okay. So this helps being able to break everything down and being able to say it's okay that you don't know, but being able to sort of at least understand those lines of code. So yeah.
And I can say for me as an actual participant who doesn't know anything and came into this fairly cold, this was invaluable and it was fun too. Because, like we said, you get that immediate kind of payout where, we would experiment with different things, we would do it, and then we would actually get to then see it on the page, see it work, see the changes.
Yep. And
it wasn't like we were all doing the same thing where everything looked exactly alike. We were encouraged to, write our own, scripts, sentences. We got our own images, GIFs, like whatever. So, people were making professional things. There was a lot of cat content.
Right. And you're able, so going off of that, what this affords too is the ability to say, okay, once you have this done and working, now you can go customize it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which everybody really loved to do. Like they could change the colors, they could change what it says, they could change the text, the size, anything they wanted, what appeared on the screen. Mm-hmm. So I think everybody really enjoyed that.
And it was fun. You could see everyone sharing, and it was just a lot of fun to see those learning gains as we went along. Yeah. So yeah. So here's an example of so we did that animation text, and here's an example of one of the participants who tweeted her animation text. And it's obviously not running because this would be, repeating over and over and over again. But we just thought that was a fun example. And yeah. So, and it was exciting too, because there was a couple times, I think more than a couple in the different sections, where people would get things to work and they would actually cheer. It was like, yes, I got it working. And then people would clap. So it was just that kind of spirit that really came up during the class that, personally, it was very heartwarming for me, but I think really kind of created a lot of really good energy. And again, that really spoke to, that my goal of, I think we're creating that confidence. So I was like, okay, I think it's working. Every section could be different going forward, but we'll see. But in the moment, it felt good. Yep. Yep. All right.
Yep.
So we're performing some research.
Cool. So, okay. Research motivation. So yes, we're conducting research on code for her. It's very exploratory at this moment in time, but we figured that it would be valuable to just, gather data on, what's going on, like, and generally like the impact of the workshop. But I think the motivations that we have here are, several. So one is feedback.
Yeah, and from the feedback, we want to consider things like the length of the workshop series. So some things we're considering, are we going to keep it at 9 weeks? We're thinking maybe going to 7. And, what else the participants may want to learn in the future iterations of the workshop. So Python's come up a lot. So these are just things we're kicking around.
Yeah, and then second, we have here learning outcomes. So, again, it was, non-credit bearing and no grading, no homework assignments, things like that. But, it still would be nice to know. I mean, we did get like verbal confirmation informally from participants saying like, yeah, we learned a lot and we learned so much. But, the learning outcomes, like it might, it's nice to know those things. And so something that we implemented is, again, it goes with the project emphasis in the pedagogy. And so we did our best to have them, create these projects, but also, let's collect the projects at the end too. And regardless of whether they're done or not, see sort of, what are the things that they learn that they've implemented in those projects.
Mm-hmm.
And the second bullet point is changes in behavior. So something we did, which I'll talk later on, is we were interested in, like from the beginning of the workshop to during and then to after, did we see any changes in behavior generally, in their motivation, in their self-efficacy, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and things like that.
And obviously I was Joss too, but I was particularly interested in the learning environment because, that also was a main motivation for me creating this workshop to begin with. So did it make a difference to them, or was that one of the motivations for them to even apply to be in this workshop, that it was targeted to female and gender diverse individuals? Did it make a difference in their comfort and their confidence and things like that? So.
Cool. So this is our data collection approach. So we have the pre-survey, the midpoint reflection, and post-survey. So generally this shows you kind of like the basic trajectory we followed during the course of the workshop. The pre-survey was done on the first day. The midpoint reflection was done midway. Mm-hmm. And then the post-survey was done on the last day of the workshop. So to get a little bit more specific in what we were doing, so we used a mixed methods approach, which combines qualitative approaches or methods and quantitative. In the survey, we had a lot of quantitative measures or questions, so Likert scale questions, things like that. For 2 scales, one on self-efficacy and the other one on after workshop behaviors. So understanding like their efficacy. So how did that change over time? How did they feel about, performing like these tasks or doing coding? Did that change their confidence? And then after workshop behaviors, we were interested in what they felt before and after the workshop. So were they more likely, what do they think or perceive like their actions would be, let's say months after the workshop? Do they think that they'll still be engaged in coding or not? And then we also wanted to see if that, if their thoughts changed on that, on the last day. And then qualitative, we asked a lot of open-ended questions on, again, their motivation, their attitudes, their perceptions, and then again, collecting their projects as artifacts. And so we're looking at those as, okay, let's see what they've learned. Let's see those, those like concepts that we taught them and that they learned in action, like seeing them in action in their projects. And so it kind of aligns with ideas of like computational thinking, but overall, like these are sort of the things that we sort of combined in our mixed methods approach. And it allows us to sort of explore everything from different angles, and sort of see like whether like this data or information complements itself and helps us, Mm-hmm. So the next few slides we have here are just from the qualitative data, obviously for the purposes of time for the presentation, but also we're still working on the data analysis for a lot of the quantitative data. And so we thought it would just be nice to have the representative quotes from each phase of the research. So here we have the pre-survey, and we have 2 quotes here. And what we did is we sort of had these sort of open-ended quotes or things that a lot of the participants said, and then we pulled out some themes. And so we did our best to sort of categorize, what people said in several themes. But you can see here in the pre-survey, I'll let you or give you like a few moments to sort of read those quotes. So what these quotes show is, again, this idea that Carmen spoke about this earlier, but, it's not a surprise, is, again, pre-survey, what are their motivations, their feelings, their attitudes towards coding in general, towards, underrepresentation in STEM, towards, how they feel as a woman or another, minority, and then how that plays out in like coding, and maybe, what are the barriers. And so you can see here that, again, these are things that have really affected women and gender diverse individuals, where they feel like intimidated. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else.
I think obviously I didn't know any of this going in. So I think it confirmed my suspicions and anecdotal things I had heard before, and also, the swaths of research that is out there. Yeah. But to me, the lack of work that is being done in some places, in many places, in my opinion, to alleviate the disparity in tech. So again, it really spurred me to do this outreach. And whenever I read this, I had no idea, okay, is this actually worth it? Is it worth my time? Yes, it is. And so
then here we have the midpoint reflection. So what we're trying to do here is sort of see what the data is telling us, and see what participants have told us, to sort of see what the narrative is in terms of like their changes. So again, this is now at the midpoint, so mid workshop, and I'll give you a moment to read these quotes. So again, you can see that these are positive, and for the most part, I wasn't expecting it to be all positive, just because I always doubt my abilities, but they were positive. And so we were just really encouraged, and it was just nice to see. So again, regardless of whether they had any hiccups in like learning the material, or they were stuck somewhere, they were still there. The fact that they made the commitment to come, and, just work and be motivated and just learn, like be open to it, regardless of what their fears were, said a lot about like what we were building as an environment. So,
and I can, speak for myself again, as a learner, that I had these, 2 experiences as well. I did not participate in the research, obviously, but being able to ask questions, and it was more, it didn't feel, at least to me, like a classroom, and people were just able to kind of ping back and forth. It was very conversational, and I think the code dissection in particular really generated that kind of conversation, rather than kind of that more question answer dynamic. And yes, it was very empowering. I don't know, the environment.
Yeah,
I think really
quickly, going back to the asking of questions, I think what's also valuable is the fact that like, not feeling intimidated is one thing, but also we built somewhat of a community.
Yeah.
And so being able to have the discussions like in real time, but also like for everyone to hear and see and contribute was empowering and just nice, because they can sometimes it was a case where I didn't even answer those questions, like a peer answered those questions, and it's like, okay, they're actually learning something, so they're doing this informal, like teaching each other things like in real time, like while we're doing this. So it was really
became almost like a peer-to-peer type thing at points. So that was kind of cool.
Okay, and then last but not least, this is the post survey. So again, this is the third phase, and so again, following that trajectory. And so this post survey was administered on the last day of the workshop. And I'll give you a moment here as well to read the quotes. So as you can see, this is only one part of the data. Obviously, we would like to see like the quantitative portion and see how that matches up with what they're saying. But overall, it's still very like rich information, and also like very encouraging and empowering for us to see that, here they feel like their confidence has increased somewhat. They feel encouraged, and they feel like maybe they're into more web development, like coding and things like that. They're more confident in their use of technology. They want to encourage their friends to participate, which is a big deal. Like telling other people like, hey, you can do this too because I did it. And so that circulates like very fast. And it's contagious too. And so I think, it's nice to read, and like I'm pleased with, regardless of the fact that this was the first code for her session. Obviously we have a lot of work to do still, but this was still a good outcome, for the first sort of official running of it after the pilot. So
this was definitely more rigorous and intentional with this rich assessment piece, because the assessment I did for the spring was asking them at the front of the classroom, so how'd it go? What'd you think? And what kind of feedback do you have? And they were very, forthright and honest, which was great. But I really echoed the sentiments too of these two participants that gave us feedback, and especially the first person, because, if I'd been given this kind of encouragement, even as early as elementary school, like, I think, some girls are given today, or even in college, I would have tried this so much sooner. But I never thought I could, because I thought, oh, I have to have an affinity for math, and it's too late for me because I was so focused on the humanities. Like, I'm not going to be able to do this and whenever I did try to start on my own, it was very overwhelming. I was confused. This was the perfect venue for me to do this. And I was just very encouraged to see that someone then is going to kind of spread the word.
So future directions, which are actually research and also for the workshop, is that at least short term is continue the data analysis. So again, we actually just wrapped up the workshop. Technically. And so we just received everything all together. And now that we have everything, we can start really digging into everything. And so hopefully that uncovers more results for us.
Implementing that feedback. So making some decisions really quickly too, because we've already started working on the spring workshop series, obviously, because we need to start recruitment as soon as our semester starts on January 7th. And we'll also be doing our focus groups.
Yeah. And so you saw earlier the trajectory of the methodology. So again, these, we had the pre-survey, the midpoint reflection, and the post-survey. But something else that you could kind of take on to the post-survey after that is focus groups. So we want to do follow-up focus groups with participants in this semester's workshop for the purposes of seeing whether they've maintained their motivation, they've maintained what they've learned in Code for Her, and just seeing what their thoughts are sort of like down the line, like weeks or months after. We want to see the retention of that information, but also like, are they using this information in their day-to-day lives? Like, are they coding now? Like, what are they doing? Are they sharing this with their friends, or have they taken on side projects? So again, we were really interested in like the short term, like when the workshop is done, but also like after, like what are they doing? And I think that's going to be valuable for us to know too.
And obviously too, we're working on dissemination. So Joss and I will be presenting a poster at the Association of Computing Machinery Conference on computer education in February. And we've submitted something for the Teaching and Learning Symposium here at Penn State, and foresee many opportunities in the future to write and speak and publish. So we're really looking forward to that because this is a novel concept and endeavor. No one else is doing it that I have identified at a library or in an academic environment. Obviously, boot camps and summer camps and Girls Who Code and Black Girls Code and paid things are being done all over the world and in the United States, et cetera, but nothing like this. Yeah. So we want to make sure to spread the word. So just a couple credits here. So now we will take questions, and also we encourage you to check out our site with all of our information, our repository of resources. The website is here, and we also have a Twitter. It's @CodeForHer. So we thank you for coming to our presentation today. And I'm going to stop the share now so we can focus on your questions and fire away.
No one has any questions.
Okay.
Do you have any comments for Carmen and Joslenne?
Well, this is Renali. I thought that the environment, the collaborative learning environment that you had there sounded wonderful, and I wish that I could take your class and learn a little bit about coding. So it made me think, how different is that from the way coding is taught in a college course or anything? Because I don't have any experience with that.
Well, I mean, I can talk from personal experience, but then again, so the last time I took a coding course was in college, and that was like at least like 10 years ago now. I have been a TA for some college like coding courses. I mean, I think the thing is that they're trying to get through so much material is one thing. So they're trying to get through so much material that it's so hard to grasp all the concepts. So if you get left behind, then unfortunately you get left behind. Every week is a new topic. And so if you're someone that's struggling or not getting it right away, it's hard. And also going into the fact that we aren't doing homework assignments or grading and testing, that's also a big deal to not put that pressure on someone, especially if they're not confident. In a lot of coding classes, there are like a lot of exams and things like that because, sort of like think of like a science course where like you're trying to learn the jargon for like medicine or something, or like the biology, like specific terminology. It's kind of like that for coding. So you're trying to learn the specific jargon for the syntax of a language. And so a lot of exams happen where they ask you to regurgitate what things mean, and ask you to on the spot to write code that solves a particular problem. So I'm not saying all of that is bad, but I think the fast-paced environment doesn't give people time to breathe, learn what they need to learn and feel confident about it, and have time to implement what they've learned. And then the second part is, you know, being in a coding class 10 years ago when I was in college, yeah, I mean, it's still the truth. I mean, I was like one of two girls in the class. And so unfortunately that's still true today.
Right. Thanks.
Let's see. So any plans on longer term follow-up?
For the spring.
For the spring, we will be running the student section in the faculty staff section again. We will be conducting research. It's going to be the same research, so we can do kind of like a longitudinal thing. We'll be doing those focus groups again.
But the follow-up is going to be longer. If
Yeah.
that's what, if that is what your question was. So like here we're following up a little bit shorter. So we're giving them weeks, but in the spring, we actually want to follow up with them months after,
Yeah.
which is going to be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's another question here from Beth. How much time did you put into this, and how did it balance? Did it balance well with your other commitments?
I can go first.
Yeah.
But so I'm working on my dissertation, and so but I'm lucky in the fact that I actually am not taking classes anymore. I'm done with classes. So really Code for Her is my only commitment. I mean, amongst other little things like meetings here and there, but all of my time and effort was spent on Code for Her. So teaching, working with Katie, who's not here, meetings with Carmen, and checking in, making sure everything is okay, and developing things week to week. So Code for Her, luckily, is my primary big commitment as like my assistantship, but also, again, it's also my dissertation research topic. And so it's nice that I can dedicate whatever work I do for Code for Her for both of those. So to my dissertation, but as well as contributing to the betterment of like the workshop program.
For me, does it balance well with my other commitments? Well, because it's my primary outreach commitment. I mean, yeah. So I do all my other things too, like my reference, my instruction, of which I do a lot. My collection development, all the other things I do as an academic librarian here at Penn State. But it's quite a bit of extra time spent because I go to both sections of Code for Her. And so that's, whenever I do Code for Her,
Long day.
Yeah, I usually am working like 13-hour days. But I love it. I mean, this is what I want to do. So of course I'm willing to make that commitment. I'm very passionate about it. And there is the extra time of just doing kind of like the logistical type things like, recruiting, and then having to do a lot of email and record keeping and reserving of rooms and like all that type of behind the scenes type things to make it work. Again, that's fine. I want to do this work. So if it takes like the extra time, okay. So that's one thing. If anyone that's here is thinking of doing this at their own institution, I'm more than happy to speak to you about it. I'm very fortunate in that I have received funding to have the extra help. And, I recognize that privilege, and not everybody would have that opportunity. But I think there are definitely ways to scale this for a smaller institution, no matter what your circumstance may be. If anyone is thinking about starting something similar, we have the materials, we have the curriculum, and we are more than willing to share it. I would ask that you speak with me first so that we could talk about it. But, we're more than willing to share. This is not just a Penn State thing. I want to make this so that everyone that wants to can promote this to as many people as possible. Let's see.
So there were a couple more questions about follow-up. One about whether you're going to scale it up to include more sections, and one about plans to see how participants use these skills down the line.
Yeah. Well, I think for that particular question now, I mean, I think we're running out of time.
And
but,
we are running out of time, yeah. But go ahead.
Well, I think this is Heather's question. I think the focus groups are probably going to be the avenue that allows us to see how they're using the skills down the line, because although it's a discussion and sort of like self-report in a way, they still would be able to tell us like, hey, what are you doing? Are you taking any follow-up courses? Are you using your skills somewhere else? Like, show us what you've done. There's no pressure, but I think that's going to be one way for us to see what's going on, what they're doing. We can do informal follow-ups too.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So that could be plans for the future, but right now I think with the amount of research and time commitment, yeah.
I know it's 11 o'clock, and Erin has put a link to an evaluation form for all the participants, so in case you have to leave, the link is there for the evaluation form. But there was one more question here from Seth, thinking about how this might integrate with other library services to further address gender parity problems in tech. Have you given any thought to that?
That would be you.
Yeah.
At the moment, I mean, this is what we are able to handle. And like I said, with the time commitment I personally have put into it, I'm kind of at the max right now, but this is obviously conversations I would want to have with other colleagues to see what they would be willing to do and help out with. Colleagues not only here at Penn State, but in Pennsylvania, PALA colleagues, ALA colleagues, wherever. But as far as library services, like I said, I do, am cognizant of, this disparity in my collection development and with other services that I provide. So for example, a couple colleagues and I have shown films that relate to gender disparity in tech and things like that. So just those different outreach things. But of course, I'm always willing to collaborate. Time and finances. Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, that's all the questions that are in there, and we are out of time. So thank you to Carmen and Joslenne for presenting this, and thank you to all the attendees for. And as a reminder, as I mentioned, Erin has put a link to the evaluation form in the comments. Please fill that out when you have time. And the recording of this will be shared and on the CRD blog. All right. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.